If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. Hi there. Today I want to talk about the outcomes you can achieve with the information and coaching that I'm able to give and the work that I'm doing here on the podcast. This is important because in order to do what I suggest, it's going to be work. It's not hard work, but it is work. You'll need to change a couple of thought patterns and build a new habit or two. In order for you to do that work, you need to know what's in it for you and what's going to happen when you do the work. I'm going to talk about what other clients have experienced as they've adopted this attention management mindset. Now, the goal is nothing short of making you a better worker and making your life easier. And that's two things, not one that depends on the other. What I mean is not that your life's going to be easier because you're a better worker. It's two things. Work's going to be easier to deal with, and life's going to be easier to deal with. Now, why do I say that? Well, let me back up a little bit. The last episode I did was something of an interruption of a group of talks about the outcomes of good attention management. Now, in those various episodes, I think there were probably 3 of them, we talked about things like lower stress, greater happiness, stronger optimism, a more positive outlook. Today, I'm going to talk about an outcome around our work-life balance. And here's my claim. The collision between work and life, that stress that we feel, that conflict that we feel between work and life, is an attention management problem masked as a time allocation problem. In other words, if you learn how to manage your attention and do it well and do it consistently, then the work-life balance problem will ease up significantly, if not disappear altogether. One of the primary pressures on productivity is this notion of work-life balance. And what I mean by that is that people study productivity and want to get better at productivity because they feel a work-life balance stress. What that means is they want to be productive and apply productivity principles at work so that work takes up less time and there's more time available for life. I think that's a slightly misguided approach, and I'll explain why. It turns out that in both the work sphere and the life sphere, we're doers of things. We human beings do things. We want to do things, and there are a lot of things we want to do. We want to do things that help us in our lives. We want different outcomes. We look at the world and we say, well, that doesn't quite suit me. I want to change it. And we initiate work to change it. And we're good at doing this. We're good at imagining ways that things could be different. We're good at having some little bit of discomfort with the way things are now. We're good at these things. We're good at inventing solutions. We're good at flexibility, all these different sorts of things. And we're very used to getting things the way we want them. And if things are not the way we want them, as I said before, we'll go back and try to make them the way we want them. Now, this may be an increasing thing in our lives. I think humans have always been changers of the environment. But maybe in the past, we've tended to be a little more content. And I'll have more to say about that at kind of towards the end. We'll talk about competition towards the end. I would say that we have these two claims on our attention. So our work and the things that we need to do for work, tasks for work, and then life and the things that we need to do for life, tasks for life. I will say in the modern world, I'll say there's a primary, a third kind of large claim on our attention. And I don't know if it gets to the level of the first two, but it is pretty high. And the primary alternate claim, that third claim on our attention, is entertainment. We are a highly entertained society, in America particularly. Now, historically, I think it's fair to say that there was much less of a focus on specifically on entertainment than there is now. And at present, entertainment is a thing that we all seem to feel like we have a right or a duty to consume. We invest a lot of attention in entertainment. And entertainment is attention consuming. A reasonable definition of entertainment is some pleasant but largely unnecessary occupation of our attention. I think I've used that phrase before, particularly if it has to do with a comfortable chair and a snack and a beverage and a screen. So that's, and I say we feel like we have a right or duty to consume because in America, we pursue entertainment more than we pursue maybe many things. Certainly more than we pursue healthy food by and large. I pursue entertainment more than I pursue longevity and going to the gym and working out. And that's a part of our culture. Some people will argue that entertainment has gotten carried away. I've mentioned before a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death that was some sort of a critique of television written in the late 60s, I suppose. And just the title, Amusing Ourselves to Death, is this notion of, the time involved and the attention involved in pursuing entertainments and amusements. So that's the third category. And so it's some combination of these three things, really, I believe, that sucks up our attention. I mean, we like to say it's a work-life balance thing, and so we want to shrink our work, but we do also consume a lot of entertainment. And I'm not picking on anybody here. I'm just being real clear about where we stand and what we're doing. So when we look at work life and work-life balance, my claim is that attention is the primary constraint in modern life. People think that what they need is better time management. And I've said this before, time is a thing that happens to us. We cannot manage it. We can't save it. We can't borrow it. There's very little we can do about time. The closest we can get to producing more time is to delegate. And delegation has its own set of problems, not the least of which is often many of us can't afford to delegate things because it's expensive to delegate things. But even in those cases, time is a mask for our attention and the deployment of our attention. And so I say the bottleneck on I'm going to say number of things we can get done, the amount of things we can accomplish. The bottleneck there is our attention and our ability to pay attention to getting things done. Sometimes there's also physical constraints. If you're going to paint something, you have to let the paint dry. That's a bottleneck. But by and large, if we can find the way to devote attention to it, which takes time, then we can get these things that we want to do done. And thus our world begins to take more like the shape of what we view in our heads. And then that's both on the work side and on the life side. Now, there are some things that are changing in the world or have changed, or however that looks. Presently, many of us are engaged in work that is very much mental work. And mental work is important here. This distinction is important because mental work requires our attention. We're less able than maybe 50, 75, or 100 years ago. We're less able to do our work absent-mindedly. And that's because our work is communications work with other people. Our work is inventing. Our work is problem solving. It's creating new things. And that's heavily mental work. I refer to it as knowledge work, along with Peter Drucker. And knowledge work is this work we do where our brain and our attention is our primary asset. Now, where we feel a pinch here is with our attention, and we feel it as stress over, are we or are we not getting things done? And if we feel like we're not getting things done, we tend to isolate it in one of the two spaces and say, ooh, I'm not getting enough done in my life because I'm spending too much on work. And so that's where we get this notion of work-life balance. As I said before, we're doers. We want to get things done. And when we feel like we're being ineffective in our doing, that causes us some stress and some unhappiness. And we look back at that and we go, oh, well, my life would be better. More of my tasks around life would be done if I could allocate away from work, and then vice versa. I would be better at my job if I could allocate attention away from my life. And it seems like the two are in competition all the time. I'm making the claim that attention is fundamental in all of the segments of our lives. We've talked about work. We've talked about entertainment. Certainly with life, maybe with life, we don't think about attention as much as we do in our workspace. But many of the things that we do in life are at least as attention intensive as things that we do at work. Relationships, for example, just live and breathe on attention. And that's how relationships go sour, is if enough attention and the right kind of attention is not paid to the relationship itself. So attention is fundamental to these segments of our lives. And I'll draw a parallel for you. When we look at sports, there's a notion of athleticism. And we all know athleticism in sports, it involves lots of different components, but we know athletic people when we see them perform. They are physically adept, they're graceful, they're strong, they're fast, all of these different kinds of ideas. But there's lots of different components and ways to measure it. Now, in the modern sports world, we're developing methodologies of training specifically for athleticism. If you're a top-notch tennis player, you have a coach that is your kind of fitness, athleticism kind of coach. versus your swing coach and your nutrition coach and all these other coaches you have. And across sports, there are small variations in the focus of athleticism. Tennis and basketball, for example, athleticism has a lot to do with short burst speed, change of direction. Where in a sport like American football, it has a lot more to do with just raw strength a lot of times. And so there's variation across different sports in the maybe focus of this athleticism, but that's a sort of a minor variation. In modern sports, everybody needs to be athletic. Now, it's really interesting to me that there's not a parallel word to athleticism in the workspace. Because if you look at athleticism, it doesn't matter what sport you're in. Athleticism is a bedrock skill that underlies all of the sports. And when we look at work, we don't see a word for that. A lot of people say, well, education is that thing. And I would argue that's not exactly it, but I get the argument, right? But we'll talk specifically about what education teaches you as compared to what attention management and this work athleticism is all about. So we get out into the workspace and there's not this notion of all around good worker kind of thing. And when we're dealing with athletics, it's quite obvious that that's there. And we even have learned how to train specifically for it. If you're curious about what that looks like, watch basketball players take their physical training, watch tennis players take their physical training. And there's lots of specific uses of weights and specific motions and all kind of different things. Even golfers, generally considered to be one of the least athletic of the major sports, even they get involved in this kind of athleticism training. Now, if we go out into the work world, this work athleticism is a challenge to define and describe. I think that education may well be a part of that, but I take it out, and here's why I take it out. Education is commonly available. You can get education. In other words, the thing that people are lacking in Western work culture is not formal education. And so I'm trying to distinguish this other thing. So we've got lots of training, we've got lots of education. You can argue whether it's good education or poor education, but we've got lots of it. So there's still this skill that we need to get. And I suggest that skill, and it's a little bit difficult even for me to nail down, but it has a lot to do with managing our attention. So we'll talk for a minute specifically about the ways different jobs may access this underlying skill set. If you're a lawyer, you've learned a specific set of skills at college, and that has enabled you to understand a specific set of skills and regulated to some greater or lesser degree that enables you to be a lawyer and practice law well. It's both your entry into the profession and some measure of your skill in doing the profession, and thus your career growth within that career path. You've learned and you've gotten education, you've got knowledge. Well, doctors, very similar education. Perhaps doctors are a little more rigorous and certainly different focus on the education, but a similar amount of education. And out into other kinds of professions. Management professionals tend to have a MBA degree, which is probably not as rigorous as law school or medical school, but it still is a significant chunk of education. And then all of these professions have an underlying notion of general education. And it's this set of mental skills, reading and math generally, and these basic educational things that happen to us. And they apply to all work. But even underlying even all that, there's a set of skills and abilities and knowledges that allow us to perform well, just like this athleticism. So the parallel is you may learn the rules and specific skills to be a tennis player as compared to a basketball player, but you still have this underlying athleticism. And that same thing is true in our work and in our life. There's this underlying level of knowledges and skills that have to do with how we manage ourselves and our attention in the modern world. When the parallel continues a little bit, when we think about athleticism, we think about our physical bodies. And the notion of athleticism is, can you put your body where it needs to be in order to do the thing you want to do? Ideas, you don't run out of energy late in the game. You have burst speed when you need it. These are definitions, factors in athleticism, if you will. And the parallel continues because in the modern workplace, it's increasingly true that we need to be able to put our attention where it needs to be when we need for it to be there. The interesting challenge is there's just not a word for this work athleticism in the English language. And I've studied some Latin and some Greek and various things to try and put one together, but it's just not available. So, so there's this parallel, and it's this underlying skill set, and how can we get good at it? And if we get good at it, if we get good at attention management, then we can put our attention on tasks as is useful. We don't waste our attention by thrashing around between tasks. So when we look at this huge number of things that we've got to do across both work and life, then we're doing the things better. And we're paying closer attention, and thus we get better results, and we get results more quickly than if we're not paying particularly good attention. So when you look at physical athleticism particularly, there's this concept of wasted motion, and that's something that also kind of leaks over into this notion of work athleticism, and it's wasted attention. And symptomatic of this is, how much of your attention do you spend managing your attention? And the common practices that we engage in order to manage ourselves or our work, or however you want to say that, are actually not good practices for doing that. And so we hesitate as we change tasks. Our interruption, do that over. We hesitate as we change tasks. Our attention is taken away from where it needs to be too easily. We allow ourselves to be put in a position where we're wasting attention, where we're thrashing around our work rather than calm focus getting it done. And it's because we're not trained in this base level of skill that underlies most of the things that we do as modern technological working America. So as we deal with these things, we get better at both work and life independently. It's the same set of skills, but work gets better, life gets better, and then we've got more space to engage in this balance that people want to talk about. Further, we come to see that work and life are really just two aspects of the same underlying need in our world. So we say work is the things that you do to make your environment into what you want it to be. And what most people call work just has to do with making your bank account what you want it to be versus making your yard what you want it to be or your kids what you want it to be. So we then get better at both work and life independently, as I said before. And in addition, we see that there are unified areas where we can accomplish tasks that help us on both sides of that. And there's much less of a competition between our work and our lives as we break down the imaginary wall between them. So that's how I say that managing your attention supports work-life balance goals. And there are other outcomes. What are some other in this same line? Well, if you manage your attention better, you will get better at your work. And we've talked about this. Now, when we look at work, and I want to be careful here because there may be different kinds of workers listening, and I want to be careful that we've got this straight. There are some jobs that simply require presence. And these are legitimate jobs, and they simply require somebody to be there. Guardian kinds of roles. Some military roles are like this, that you're the sentry and your alertness is necessary, but not necessarily a whole bunch of mental, right, creation, right, problem solving kinds of things. There's also a huge swath of jobs that require the production of certain states in the world, something like service. And I'm thinking about people that provide maybe personal services, and their whole goal is to produce a tangible outcome, be it a physical product or perhaps a different organization of some physical aspect. I'm thinking in this case, service people like the wonderful people who give me haircuts. And they don't actually produce a thing, but they're heavily involved with the physical. And then there are other kinds of work that require things that don't have much of a physical representation. And we'll call those things deliverables. And I use that term because we developed that term when we talked about IT and project management kind of work. We talk about deliverables. It's not a product in the sense of a tangible product. These are the white collar jobs where your results in the world are these packages of information-based product. And it's really interesting because the primary value of the deliverable is the information that's in it. But there's an aspect of the creation of the package that's very important. So since a deliverable is an information-based product, then people are going to need to give their attention to the deliverable in order to comprehend the information that it contains. Now, that's probably a bunch of big, hard way to say that people need to read your report in order to derive value from it. But that also means that your report needs to be readable. And so this is a real interesting challenge, maybe a ratio between the content of the product and the packaging of the product in some way is maybe that's a high ratio in kind of knowledge work that we're talking about here. But it really, I think, is of different character, and the value of what you produce can be almost completely undermined by how it's delivered and how comprehensible it, as one aspect, how comprehensible it is to readers. And that may not even be entirely in your control. But we think about these things in this deliverable space because it is so malleable and so information based. The point there is that both the information content of the deliverable and the packaging that make it more readily consumable by the target user, both of those things are mental work. And so the intensity, and you're familiar with this, it's highly likely if you're listening to this podcast that you're a knowledge worker. You may not know the term, but you know deliverables. You've heard that terminology. And so just trying to explain it so that we all understand what we're all talking about in some way to define it. So then that's why our attention is critical. And if we can apply our attention effectively and learn about that application of attention, then we can improve these outcomes, these deliverable outcomes. And I say that because a much better deliverable may have the same informational content and just be in a better package. But it's also possible to work so hard on the packaging that the information content is not there. And so that balance is a challenge out in the knowledge work world. But as we focus our attention, we get better at these things. So that's another outcome. Your work product will improve if you're better able to apply your attention. So that means you'll have better opportunities in your career. You'll have career growth. People will begin to recognize you as somebody who gets things done. One of the best assets in the business world is to be recognized as somebody that meets the commitments that they make. And when you say it's going to be done, it's done. And that's a really important aspect of business. And a lot of people get bogged down in quality. And I'll just say that quality is important, but delivery is absolutely critical in the world. People can survive on an 80% comprehensibility, but they can't survive on a non-delivery. And I've talked about that in other podcast episodes. So you get better opportunities in your career. Now, by the same token, if you get better at deliverables and you get better at producing work and you get better at meeting your commitments, it will also affect many of the things that are in the realm that most people call life. You'll get better at doing the things that constitute life. How many times have you had an argument with your significant other because you forgot to do something that they asked you to do? Or you forgot a commitment, you forgot an anniversary. And so if we can manage those things well, then by definition, we get better at life. And we can focus our attention where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, and we won't be wasting it as much. As I've said before, in this community, we say, okay, work is what you do to make yourself and your environment into what you want it to be. And that definitely includes all these things in this other sphere that you will also get better at. Another example of the impact of managing your attention well and nailing down this underlying skill set, this work athleticism thing that I'm struggling so hard to find for you. As you manage your attention better, it will also help you become a better learner, a better student, which is part of life. And you'll get better at both being a student on behalf of the things that we call money work, learning new skills for your profession and getting better at what you do for money, along with learning better in the life work of your hobbies. Or maybe you want to learn more in the spiritual realm of your life. Or maybe you want to learn more about how to have strong relationships with other people. And if you can manage your attention, you get to those things as well. And the bottom line is, just like an athletic person in the sports realm is reliably where they need to be doing what they need to be doing, then you'll become the kind of person who can reliably put their attention where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, and produce results consistent with your intent. It's true that athletic people without training are better at sports than non-athletic people without training. And you can be the most athletic person that anybody knows, and the first time you pick up a tennis racket, you're not going to be a great tennis player. But you're going to be better than somebody who's not athletic in the same circumstance. And mapping that over into our attention, our work sphere, then you'll be better at approaching new situations. You'll be a better learner if you can get your attention sorted. And perhaps the strongest thing is that as you learn to manage your attention and you're where you need to be when you need to be there, attentionally speaking, then we find that we are able to deal with the work-life balance problems, but also that you'll get better. You'll have more confidence that you are the kind of person who can be effective. You'll become the kind of person who does meet commitments all the time. You'll become the kind of person who doesn't lose track of things ever, who doesn't have to say, oh, I forgot that. You become the kind of person that follows through and follows up. And these are intensely valuable skills in life, definitely in the workplace, but also outside the workplace. And so you'll have that confidence that'll be there. Now, there's the notion of stress. And the reason I want to bring this up, we dealt with it in a previous podcast, but the reason I want to bring it up is because I think there's two areas of stress that relate to work life. So one is this fear-based stress of, did I do enough to produce the result I wanted to produce? Are my outcomes of a high quality level? Did I meet all the requirements? This kind of stress. And I've talked about that in multiple episodes about how that can lead us to this fear-based perfectionism in our work, which is largely a waste of attention. The other kind of stress is, I'm going to say, a more existential stress around, am I good enough? What we see in the modern environment is competition. And I think this is important because this is going to be another category of outcome. Competition is a relatively new feature in society and in our economic world. I mean, we don't tend to think of it that way, but I'm going to argue that it is, in fact, relatively new. And the reason that I say that is because in an agricultural society, there's not a ton of competition. Your competition, the the forces that are derailing your intent are weather and insects and crop diseases, not your neighbor. Your neighbor's The quality of your neighbor's dirt has nothing to do with the quality of your own dirt. And so there's less of a competitive sense there. Now, it did come along in various, I'm not talking about a recent development in terms of the last 100 years. It did come along. I think there was lots of competition among herders, for example, lots of underhanded dealings apparently amongst herders. However, in the modern world, we're hyper aware of competition. Our careers collide with each other in the business world. And I'll give you examples. In the corporate world, we're all very aware that we're competing for the same promotion. We just don't talk about it very much amongst each other, but we're aware that it's at some level, there's some competition for that. If you're a salesperson, for example, you're aware that there are other people who are trying to sell a similar product, trying to meet a need that's similar to yours. And in some ways, you're in competition with them. One of the basic notions in business schools is the success of a business is based on its ability to compete in its industry, competitive models of business success. Economics teaches us scarcity, and where there's scarcity, there's competition. And this competition is now pervasive in modern society. Now, the challenge of competition goes back to, am I good enough? Because am I good enough is almost always a comparison question. And so we've got this on our minds. And so an additional outcome of being the kind of person who is recognized for getting things done, who is recognized for their self-management, who is recognized for meeting commitments, is our best antidote to fears along this line. And we get the courage to believe that we can, in fact, be on top of our game a good bit of the time. Much like somebody who's athletic is not afraid to jump on a new piece of equipment. Somebody who has good balance and good hand-eye coordination, maybe, for example, wouldn't mind jumping on a snowboard instead of a pair of skis. They might not be as good, but they're also not going to hurt themselves. And so that's true as well. So that's another outcome, is this overall sense, this generic sense of confidence and agency in the world of believing that I'm the kind of person who can be effective in the world, which has all kinds of great implications further down the line. So that is a little bit more abstract, a little bit more vague, is that generic sense of confidence, but it does grow out of our consistency in behaving in these ways, and thus our ability to have this learning and this skill set and this knowledge that we've been talking about. So we'll take a minute and get out and do a recap here. So we talked about what are outcomes around work-life balance. So we've talked about other outcomes of managing your attention. If we have ideas that have to do with stress. We talked about that. If we have, we'll get greater happiness and optimism in our lives. And we've talked about that previously. And today we're talking about work-life balance. And what happens is we get more effective at tasks. We get more effective at doing. We get more consistent at meeting commitments if we're focused on this attention management of ourselves and our attention. We get better at these sorts of things. And the outcomes of that are, one, work gets better and life gets better, and there's more margin to negotiate the conflict between the two, assuming that there is conflict between the two. The second is we learn to recognize that the doing of things is the core skill, and it happens in both work and life. And some of the things we do for money, and others of the things we do for other kinds of non-monetary rewards. So it also unifies work and life to some degree. We become the kind of person who gets things done. We get better at our work. We get better at learning. We get better at our hobbies. We get better at relationships. So we get better at all these specific aspects of our work life. And when I say work life, I don't mean work-life as in life at work. I mean work/life as in space-time, the unification of the two things, work life. So these are some outcomes that we can expect. So if these are areas, and we did talk a little bit about a different area of confidence which lowers stress. So we talked about a little bit of a different facet of stress around the competitiveness that we see in both our work for dollars and our work for other results. And so we become this more confident, less, dare I say, fearful person in the world. So these are some outcomes you can expect. If these are things that sound good to you, if they're results that you would like to have in your own life, then let's have further conversation. I bring people along in these areas. It's what I do. And I've studied it for 15 years and I've coached it for 10. And so I can help in these areas. And I can help you come along as the kind of person who we've just described. And so if that seems good to you, if that seems like a good idea, I'd love to have you reach out. I'm not hard to find. You can contact me on LinkedIn, Larry Tribble, not a very common name, so I'm easy to find. And also you can hit me directly, Larry@dobusyright.com. So I hope that this has helped you get motivated to do some work in your attention management. One easy step is to go back and listen to podcast episodes you may have overlooked or not been able to access. And so they're all out there. The podcast is it's certainly not a news podcast. It's a primer on how to do these things. And it's my thoughts trying to help you and motivate you as you get into these things. Certainly the pinnacle of this kind of training is the attention compass training that I talk about all the time. All of that said, I hope that you're motivated to work on these areas and to become the kind of person who has this strong work-life balance in their lives. That's what we call doing busy right. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the Attention Compass process. Attention Compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusywrite.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do busy right.